So I did a little bit of research today on desertion. And I think that Bo Bergdahl probably won't be court-martialed for desertion because it is a very specific charge under U.S. military law, from what I can see. And you can't play what we know about civilian law, which most of us exists on television, or what we hear in the news, and military criminal justice. Because from what I hear and from what I can read, a conviction for desertion has a very narrow criteria. It requires a very specific criteria to be met. And the prosecutor would have to prove that Bergdahl quit his unit and was intent to remain absent permanently. And he had to have that specific intent. That's got to be tough to prove. 5 years later and in Afghanistan. Right? From military law here in San Diego, former Lieutenant Colonel in the Marines, former JAG Officer Gary Barthel joins me. Gary, so is that about right?
Well, that's somewhat correct, Sully. They could prove his intent to remain permanently away based on circumstantial evidence. And as I understand the news reports, there were some notes and things that he left behind and statements he made that might indicate that he intended to quit his unit and remain away permanently.
Well, the bureaucratic process in this thing, first of all, the Pentagon never has considered him to be a deserter, and they didn't remove him from any of the Army roster. And don't they have to process some sort of paperwork so you can't get back pay and leave, and so that the union can get a replacement? I mean, none of that ever happened. So I mean that you're the expert, but that's got to be part of the issue, right?
That is true. They would have to process that paperwork, and that's an administrative role that the command would have to take, but it's an administrative role, and if he were tried for desertion, that evidence would come out, but then the military judge would also instruct that that is an administrative process and that they should not consider that with regard to the elements of the offense.
A career in the Marines as a Lieutenant Colonel and former JAG Officer Gary Barthel joins us here on News Radio 600. What are the other options? Could he be? And you've heard the story. So first of all, just from your purview, I mean, you've been there. You're the tip of the spear. But I also know that you're an attorney, so you tend to look at things through a different lens. What are your comments that you've in the last 48 hours about this story?
Well, it does baffle me somewhat that you've got a soldier who was in a hostile environment who just decided to walk away from his unit, and it appears that he was somewhat disgruntled with the war effort and the United States position and treatment of the Afghan people. And in my opinion, conduct like that should not go unpunished. But then you have to look at the laws, and the government has to view the laws and the regulations, determine, is there a crime that's punishable? I think, of course, we're just going off of what we're hearing.
Because the venom, it's so interesting. I'm looking at the line messages I'm getting. I'm looking at the Facebook posts I'm getting. I mean, Carolyn sends me, he is a deserter. Try him as such, strip him of all rank and all back pay, and send his ass to Leavenworth. He's not a hero. Now, no, I happen to know this friend of mine. She's also in the military. And then I got another guy that says, will the same consideration be given to the soldier in Tijuana? He's probably in more imminent danger in a TJ jail than the deserter ever was.
Right.
There's a lot of venom, and there's a lot of just bile coming towards this guy, and he hasn't been tried of anything yet.
That's correct. And I'm confident that the command will do an investigation, but I'm not so confident that they would charge him with any UCMJ violations and pursue it through a court-martial.
As a JAG officer, what would you do? If let's say he comes, he's home, and you're hearing all of his company and witnesses say that he left, and you see these emails. You're a former JAG officer. Gary, what do you do? What would you do in that position, let's say, fast forward 6 weeks and he's on U.S. soil?
Sure. What I would do is I would advise my commanding general that a thorough investigation needs to be done into the facts and circumstances surrounding his leaving the command. And once that investigation is completed, then make a determination as to what offenses he could be charged with, if any, or whether he should be administratively separated from the service, either honorably or with something less than an honorable discharge.
Do you think, Gary? Do you think that this story is just going to go away in light of the fact that that it's all circumstantial at this point, or do you think this thing has legs to it?
I think it has some legs to it. It's going to be interesting to see how the Army handles the case. I mean, there are several other offenses besides desertion that he could be charged with.
As in?
One would be unauthorized absence from the unit. He could also be, depending on how an investigation came out. But if it's found out that he was giving information to the enemy, he could be charged with aiding the enemy. He could be charged with aiding the enemy for just communicating with the enemy. Once he's in the enemy hands, if he provided information to the enemy, he could be charged with that.
Last question for you, and once again, I appreciate your time, and you're always a good resource for us. Former Lieutenant Colonel in the Marines and former JAG Officer Gary Barthel joins us. And if you want more information, you can go to militarylawcenter.com. Gary can be found there. But what do you make of these emails? Are these emails circumstantial, or are these emails real credible evidence?
The emails coming from fellow soldiers?
Yeah, the emails coming from him to his parents prior, saying things like, very anti-American sentiment, but they're written from him to his parents.
No, I think typically in cases like this, to prove intent to permanently remain away from your unit, you typically have to rely on statements, written statements. It's not unusual to find statements on somebody's cell phone, text messages to friends or family, email. Those are all relevant on the issue of the individual's intent.
Sure. Very good.
And they only need to form that intent at one point, at the point that they're going away from the unit. They could change their mind, a week down the road, but it doesn't really matter. As long as they form that intent at one specific point in time, it's considered desertion.
Very good. I appreciate your time, Gary. Gary Barthel. If you want more information on Gary, always go to militarylawcenter.com. And, the plot thickens here. 800-600-KOGO. So my question for you is one of fairness here. Many of you have already tried him and convicted him. Do you think this guy deserves a fair trial? Do you think this guy deserves a fair shake? 800-600-KOGO. I'm Sully. That's